Have you got a weak clutch finger just like Al? If you do, stand by for the next video because we're installing this.
Today on Hard Enduro, we convert and install a Clake One Light Clutch. So if you have a weak finger like me, go ahead and like and subscribe. Today we're going to be installing the Clake One Light Clutch onto the Beta Xtrainer, the 2024 model. Now there's going to be two parts to this video because I had this clutch on another bike. So part one is going to be converting this from a mineral oil system into a dot brake fluid system. So we'll take you through both of those parts. And for full disclosure, this was on a Yamaha WR250. And I bought all the components through Clake. Now, Clake are a very good quality Australian engineering company, but I did have some issues using the mineral oil conversion. So you'll see what I got in my hand here. What's required to change any bike that has a cable clutch system on it is to convert it to this mineral oil and have this actuator arm here. Now, I went into Clake in person and they were very good. They gave me quite a few changeovers of different parts, but I could never quite get this actuator to work properly on the Yamaha. The stroke of this was just not quite right. It still worked, it was still rideable, but what it meant is that I always had a bit of clutch riding, and when I'd pull up, I sort of had the clutch biting and trying to ride me along a little bit. So, you know, feel free to do whatever you want to do with your bike. I would just say be wary of having a third-party conversion on another third-party clutch, that there might just be too many components to get a good result. However, if you have a bike with a hydraulic clutch system already, we love this clutch. It works really, really well. We'll take you through the steps to bleed it and to get it working optimally. But just really consider it if you're going to do a conversion, and certainly talk to Clake about it before you do so. So what we'll do next is take you over to the workbench and we'll strip this down and show you how to convert it from mineral oil to DOT. Now, once again, credit to Clake. If you ask them, they'll provide you really detailed instructions on how to do this conversion and which parts you need to do it, and they'll send those parts out to you. So our first step to convert the Clake from our mineral oil setup to our DOT setup is going to be to open up the reservoir. We're going to tip out the mineral oil, and then we're going to clean out all of this top end of the system. So all that requires is an Allen key. There's two little bolts in the top. They're stainless steel, so we've got to be quite careful not to strip these out. I'll take off this gold cover. Now, Clake have highlighted as well that this one has mineral oil stamped on it. You can buy a replacement that will say DOT, but this is my own clutch and my own bike, so I've not bothered. There's no difference in the part, just that it would tell you which oil is in that. Now we have the rubber diaphragm, and I want to be careful not to get too much on my fingers. You can use gloves. This part at least is mineral oil. I'm going to tip that out. Again, particularly if it's brake fluid, you want to be careful not to get it on all the painted parts. I've tipped that out of there. It's pretty clean. The oil's a little dark. Now I'm just going to use some brake cleaner to flush that out. With brake cleaner, to get all the grit out, you really want to let it spray and flow out instead of having to wipe and get things into a braze. So always try and hold it in a manner where you can spray and let the oil and residue wash out. Now there's also the port where that fluid would come out, which I'll give a little wash as well. And then we'll have to bleed this system very heavily with the DOT a bit later on. So as you can see, we've opened up the bottom plate now, revealing some of the working parts. And this Clake here is about 3 years old, and it survived pretty well. So there's still a decent amount of grease in there. There's no grease left in the main screw, so we'll put some back in there, but nevertheless we've had no water or corrosion apparently get in there. So the second step is to take off the main clutch lever. So just be careful these parts don't fall out. I'll turn it over and take out that central bolt. There we go, just a little bit corroded. Once we've taken out the central lever bolt, now we need to take the clutch lever off. So we're going to take out these two Allen bolts here. And then we're going to take off this gold cover. Now we have access to the piston and we can do this conversion. So we'll set this up so that we can swap these parts over. So once we've taken the clutch lever off, we now need to wind off the mount, which is just on a thread. So we turn that until it comes off. Now you may find there's some locating pins at either end that will want to drop out. So just keep a watch of those, but they go where the threaded bolts are on either side. And the next step will be to get access to the piston. So we've got a push rod off this cam system here, and there's a grub screw that stops that from rotating. So the instruction is to loosen that a full turn in an anti-clockwise direction. It's a very fine Allen key here. So I can feel that loosening up. And another half turn should be sufficient. Now, the push rod here is threaded and then is a narrower shank. So we're going to rotate that with a flat blade screwdriver anti-clockwise until it comes all the way out. You'll see the flat blade on the top. So we rotate that. Now, be wary, these parts are going to start to fall apart as each of these pieces come out. And I can feel a little bit of spring tension here as I bring it out. I can finish that off by hand. And now that push rod comes all the way out. And this cam lever system should come out from the spindle. And now you can see our mineral oil piston. Now you can see our mineral oil piston, and we're going to work that out. And that completes the disassembly. Now it's time to reassemble the Clake with the DOT parts. So you can see here the parts that Clake have supplied. A new piston and a new rubber diaphragm. We've also cleaned out inside the piston tube here. And now we're going to put this new piston back in. So the spring goes in first. And then there's a couple of rubber seals as it goes in. Just be careful to work those in. Okay, now we put our cam parts back on. the way in. And our piston pin can go back through. And this needs to be wound in clockwise until there's approximately 2 millimeters sticking out from the cam. Make sure you don't meet too much resistance as that piston pushes in. So there's our 2 millimeters, and that matches where it was when I took it out just a short time ago. And now I've got to tighten up that rotation locking pin. Again, I'm going to be quite delicate with this fine screw. Just enough so that pin won't rotate. From here we can start reassembling the rest of it. So we're going to put our gold cap back on. Now this is a offset shape. So if you put it on one way and it's not lined up, then you can just rotate it around. And we're going to thread our clutch lever back on. And we'll attach our clutch lever once again. Double washers here. Now we're nearly finished our reassembly. We've wound our clutch lever back on, and before we put the full lever on, we want to make sure that we've still got some tolerance underneath, because you can wind it on too far and then you'll get some rubbing. So once we're happy with that tolerance, we can put our lever back on and our 2 washers and our central bolt. And we don't need to tighten those down too much because we're going to be making more adjustments when we install this. And before we put our bottom cover back on, there's also a good chance to set this preload adjustment. So when we go to install, we need to have this wound out a fair way, and it's going to need to have some slack in it. If you do this when it's attached, what can happen is you wind out too far and then that comes out, which will mean you've got to take this cover off all over again. So now's a good chance to set that, preset that, and just bring it in a few winds. If I get that threaded. And that should mean we've got that bit of slack when we start to install the Clake. So we'll put this cover back on and we'll get into the installation phase. Now that we've reassembled the Clake, the next step will be to install it. Now the Clake website and YouTube channel have got some really good installation videos, so we're going to leave that side of it to them. What we will show you though is the parts that are relevant to having our fluid conversion here. So the main thing we're going to focus on once we install this is that when we put some DOT fluid in it, we're going to bleed this top end here before we connect it to our DOT line. Now, you'll notice here there's a lot of debate online about the length of your hydraulic cables. And if I line up the Clake here with the mount on the Beta, you'll see the line goes in here. So that's probably a 50 or 60 millimeter difference. Now, some bikes will need to have a longer cable used, and you can find a lot of information about that online. Beta typically has needed a longer line. However, in this 2024 model, we've noticed there's quite a bit of slack that's wrapped up under the headlight here, which does not seem to be common on the previous year models. So we're hoping we're going to get away with this one. And the main thing that you're looking for is that when you're at that full right lock, is that you're not pulling on the hydraulic cable and it's not restricting you getting to that far right lock. So we'll see how we go with that. We're going to try and fit this now and see what the length looks like. The other key thing is once you remove this hydraulic line, we want to keep this up or cable tie it to one of the other cables so we don't lose any fluid, because we're going to be bleeding the system up. So we want to get the least amount of air into this system as possible. So the next stage is going to be disconnecting the existing clutch, taking off this clutch lever, and then installing the Clake onto the bars so that we can do our prime and then bleed. We are going to bleed from the bottom. We'll show you a little bit about that. We've installed these Clakes on quite a few bikes now, and it's quite finicky trying to get the final parts of the bleed. So we're going to do this from the bottom up. We won't show too much detail on that. There's some really good videos from places like Tokyo Off-Road that show you how to do a bottom-up bleed. And again, back to the Clake videos, they show all the top bleed. We're just going to step through a few of the things and also the things that are pertinent to the fact that we've changed our fluid type. So step one is going to be taking off the line. And we want to hang that up so that we don't introduce any air into the system. So we've got a cable tie ready to do that. Some paper towel to keep the DOT off our paintwork. Okay, so you may find there's somewhere that it rests naturally. I'm just going to put a cable tie on it so that it can't slip free. That'll save us a lot of work keeping air out of the system in the beginning. Now we're going to take this unit off, which doesn't matter because we're going to dispose of this, and then we'll install the Clake. So we have the Clake One Light Clutch installed on the Beta. Now we have experienced a few challenges this morning as this was converting it from mineral oil to DOT. As I mentioned, we had some written instructions from Clake, but whilst the swapping over the parts, the piston wasn't particularly hard, there were quite a few little nuances with resetting it all. So you'll see this area that we have opened up here with the head of the piston rod, which normally has this gold cover over it. So there was a part at the end of the instructions which talked about winding this into 2 millimeters. Now, I'll be honest, we misread this in the first time because it looked like it was just a duplicated step of the reassembly. But what it's actually referring to is you're setting the depth of the piston, which does make a difference in the reservoir. So a step that people don't normally need to go through, but perhaps they should, is having the lid off the reservoir. And when this piston pin is too far out, it means if you're doing the little movements that you're told to bleed all the air out, you get a lot of spurting coming up out of the reservoir here. If that's happening, it means that this piston pin is not far enough in. So there's also a tiny little grub screw on the side here that you need to release half a turn, and then you can wind this piston pin in clockwise. And you need to do that until you see no more spurting from the reservoir when you're making these small movements. And when you hit that point, you then go back small turns until you just see a little bit of a pulse coming up in the fluid. Now, that's pretty much verbatim out of their instructions. It was very hard to interpret that step until we'd got this far and realised that that was a problem. Now, I'm also suspicious that the dissatisfaction I expressed with this on a Yamaha where I had to do the hydraulic conversion, I was blaming the Magura conversion kit earlier. I'm now suspicious that it might have all the time been the depth of this piston pin, because we reset this to exactly where it was coming off the old bike. Now we are probably a good millimetre to a millimetre and a half further in, which made a big difference to this reservoir. And I can remember when I fitted this to the Yamaha that it was spurting fluid. So it's something to keep in mind if you're having problems and you're not getting that final lack of free play here, or when you get to the stage of applying some force balance adjustment, so you pull the lever in and you're dialing the knob, when you return it, you might find that it's not returning that last little bit. What we've found today is that that was due to the depth of this piston pin. So definitely consult Clake if you're having those issues, but that was what solved our problem today. Now what you'll see is we've applied the force balance adjuster, we've got a nice light clutch and it returns nice and freely. We've just had a play out on the road and it's really nice. Now we've just got to tweak our tilt and our settings where we want to have it. But that is our conversion and installation of the Clake One Light Clutch. So to be clear, if Furs and I were doing this on anyone else's bike in the future, taking off this cap and testing the piston with the pulsing in the fluid is something we will now do as standard practice. So you can consult Clake if you want to, but you don't really lose anything by taking off this cap. There's no fluid or anything in here. It's just to keep debris out and checking when you lose all pulsing from this reservoir versus when you back it off a little bit and you start to get that slight pulse, because that seems to be the optimum balance of when you can then apply the force adjustment and get the most out of this clutch.